ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
In the midst of the Cold War, many people thought that we were destined for a nuclear apocalypse.
We, 1959ers, lived in the shadow of the hydrogen bomb and some world-destroying war of nuclear fission.
And now we live in fear of something else.
Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning.
But does worrying about these things make them more or less likely to happen? I'm Matt Bevan, and from If You're Listening, this is Black Swans, a special series about why it's so hard to predict the future. It's available now on ABC Listen.
It took a while to get going, but demand for home batteries in Australia has taken off. More people installed them in 6 months than the previous 5 years. Not only that, renewables and energy storage contributed to half of the nation's power supply last quarter. Today, Tony Wood from the Grattan Institute on what that means for everyone's power bills. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Tony, so far this year it has been hot, really, really hot in some places. And not so long ago, that really would have seen our power supply buckle, wouldn't it? Just tell me what we would have seen in the past.
Well, two things tend to happen is, firstly, these terrible heat waves take out some of the physical system. Power lines get burnt out. Big trees can fall across power lines, taking out transmission lines and connections. A lot of the power poles are still timber, so they get burnt out. And in addition to that, our power system struggles in the heat, and some of the things like local substations can also fail, and that can produce both general and highly localised problems. Now, at the same time, you can get outages of the very big power stations, and if these things all happen together, they can be pretty catastrophic. But this time around, most of that system was okay, although there were some quite nasty, localised outages. Generally speaking, the system rode through all this successfully, and we didn't have widespread outages. We didn't have a shortage of actual electricity supply. The main thing was disruptions to the system that gets the electricity from where it's generated to our homes and businesses.
Okay, so this summer, despite everyone, if they have it of course, running their air conditioners in overdrive, it has been pretty good. So just tell me now, what has changed to make it more stable?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, I think part of it has been sometimes things go badly wrong altogether. This time around it didn't, so that's in some way, I wouldn't say good luck completely, but it's certainly a good outcome to have the what are increasingly unreliable coal-fired power stations running much more reliably than they have in the last couple of years. That's obviously an underlying thing. Secondly, when people have got solar and batteries, that means that if the grid goes down, you can just keep going because you've still got your solar, your battery, provided your system has been configured to make sure it does that. And I know many people in various parts of the country who benefited from that while their neighbours lost power. They didn't because their system was able to keep going through. But now, that's not the perfect solution, but it's damn so better than not. And that gives you a bit of a precursor to the sort of things that could happen in the future, because you could even do that not just at the household level, you could also do it at the town level, and you could imagine small communities which often have long, skinny power lines which can be taken out in fires could actually themselves isolate when that line goes down, and that would be clearly, I think, a good thing. So we're seeing those sort of trends in the data we've seen so far. It's not yet where it needs to be, but it's certainly a positive sign.
Tony, let's just look at where we're actually up to now. There are something like 4.3 million consumers that actually have solar now, but batteries is where it's at. It's, in your words, revolutionary. Just tell me about it.
Well, two things about this. One is we've never been able to store electricity as the way we store everything else. And storage is important in any sort of logistical system because what it does, it balances supply and demand. And that's why this is a really interesting revolution, because for the first time, using the battery technology we have now, we can store electricity. Now, that's important because while we've got all these solar systems, something like 30 or 40% of homes across Australia have got solar now, they're producing a lot of electricity in the middle of the day, and often that's not where we need it. So what we can now do is store that electricity in this battery and use it later in the day when it hits peak demand. And that has two benefits. Firstly, you can benefit yourself financially. And secondly, if everybody does that, or more people do that, what it does, it means the peak demand in the later part of the day is a lot less. That means the grid needs to be not as big, and that saves money for everybody.
Wow. Is that going to cover you for the whole night, just out of interest?
Well, it depends. Now, what we found is, courtesy of the federal government's rebate program, people have been putting in bigger and bigger batteries. Some of these batteries, if they're full, can probably power a home for a couple of days.
Wow.
That's where we're heading. Now, it depends upon how big your solar system is and how big the battery is and what sort of weather patterns you have. But I know people who've now got systems where it doesn't just get them through the peak period of the evening, it gets them right into the middle of the night. I think we're still some ways away before people in suburban Australia would be prepared to cut the wire, but you can see where this is heading.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, incredibly, Australian households installed as many batteries in the final 6 months of last year as they did in the entire preceding 5 years. That's pretty incredible. So what's driving that?
Well, part of it is this government program that was kicked off in July, and it was initially $2 billion. It was so successful that the government has been able to justify expanding that to a $7 billion plus program.
The policy came into effect in July. It aimed to slash the purchase price of a battery by about 30%. The government announcing it will now introduce a tiered system, so support will be staggered in line with battery size.
Part of the reason for that is that people have been putting in bigger batteries than the government ever anticipated. And the third thing is that initially, when batteries were being talked about to benefit in the way I've described, people were expecting that the cost of batteries would come down as significantly and as quickly as the cost of solar panels came down. We weren't seeing that with batteries, but the combination of now what we're seeing is costs are coming down, technology is improving, and we've got this rebate program from the government. Altogether, that's been a very positive move, and that's why we've seen the best part of 200,000 consumers in Australia have now taken up that option, and that's got significant benefits for them and actually for everybody else.
Yeah. So how much are you around out of pocket nowadays for a battery?
Yeah, well, that can be quite dramatic. I mean,
right.
People are spending up to, $15,000, $20,000 on these systems now.
Right.
Now, many people find this is an investment that at their time of life they're happy to do. They think about it in terms of reducing their energy bills, being less dependent upon big, horrible government energy companies, all that sort of stuff. They do it for all sorts of reasons, but also they do it to save money.
So it really is a game changer, isn't it, for a lot of people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to continue. And I think one of the challenges here, of course, is that like a lot of things in life, the people who can afford it are the ones who can afford to save money.
Yes.
And so I think one of the challenges for government is to say, okay, now what do we do about people who really aren't in a position to finance that sort of money, whether they're renters, whether they're people on low incomes, whether it's in public housing, all those sorts of things. And I think that's where the attention probably going to have to be moving to. What we don't want to do is have anybody left behind.
All right, well, Tony, let's have a look then at what this all means for electricity prices and our power bills. Now, just to point out, it's not just solar that we're talking about at this point, is it? Because we're also talking about other renewables like wind. So just tell me what's going on overall. Yeah,
basically, we use the term renewable energy to describe wind and solar. There are other things that could be described that way, wave technologies and so on, but they're the dominant ones, certainly in countries like Australia. Now, 2005, that sort of period of time, renewable energy was less than 10% of our electricity supply, and it was almost all hydro. Now, for the first time in the last quarter of last year, that's gone past 50% across the country.
The winds of change are blowing through Australia's energy system. For the first time, renewable energy meeting more of Australia's electricity demand than coal and gas, which have long been the lifeblood of supply.
Some parts of the country, effectively, it's almost 100%.
Wow.
Other places, it's more like 30%, but we're making good progress. We're not quite on track to the government's target of 82% by 2030, but more than 50% is dramatic change, right? And that's having an impact because the electricity produced from a wind farm or a solar farm, when it's produced, is cheaper than producing electricity from coal and gas. And so we're seeing some real benefits whilst the Coal and gas is still there and helps to balance that renewable system, at least for now. We are seeing those reductions in prices. And across the board, across Australia, last quarter of last year compared to the quarter of the previous year, power prices came down by about 40%. It varied state to state, but that's pretty significant.
That's the wholesale price.
That's the wholesale price. On average, that represents about 40% of the bill that we pay to our energy retailer. But that's 40% of 40% is not worth. I wouldn't sneeze at that, that's for sure. Now, I wouldn't be promising, and neither is the government, that that's going to happen every quarter because everything went right in the last quarter of last year, and the previous quarter things didn't go so well. So we'll see bumps. There'll be bumps along the way.
Okay, so this switch to renewables is actually now starting to bring down prices.
Indeed. Now, I think we've got to be a little careful with this because I think we're going to see for the next few years, that's most likely to be the trend. And I'm assuming that, the existing gas and coal stations continue to operate as they have been. What tends to happen now is as we get more and more renewables into the system, as we head towards the sort of levels that the government's looking for, up to 75, 80%, what then happens is that it puts financial pressure on the other suppliers, the other generators, in particular coal. Now, that's what we want. We want to put pressure on the coal generators eventually to close, but not too early. As coal closes, and we have to build more and more transmission and storage to sustain reliably a very high level of renewable energy, I think those two tend to broadly cancel each other out. That is, the lower cost of generation of wind and solar, to some extent, is offset by the extra transmission and storage we need to make sure the system stays reliable and possibly using gas. So altogether, I think we are likely to see, most likely, if nothing else goes wrong, some movement downwards in prices, retail prices as a result of wholesale prices. But we might see some creeping back up again as we get to the very high levels of renewables. That's not a bad thing because it means we're able to survive, put in place a system which is dramatically different from what it's been for the last 100 years, but it remains affordable.
All right. As more and more coal plants close, actually the bills will need to rise again.
Yes, but not because coal is the cheapest thing. It's because right now we've got a situation where the combination is almost the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Coal will close because you put in more supply, prices go down, inevitably the market responds, and the least financially viable of those sources, and we want that to be coal, closes, the prices move back up again. Now, I don't think prices are going to go through the roof at all, probably closer to where they are now, but I also don't think we can promise the prices are going to come down consistently in the long term.
Yeah, and of course the country's biggest coal-fired power station, Eraring in New South Wales, that's going to stay open for another 2 years. Indeed,
and that's a good example of how there are bumps along the road, right? We had expected that we should be able to close Eraring next year. We did the same thing, happened in Victoria with 2 of the large coal-fired power stations there. We realised, look, we're not getting the new renewables and the supporting mechanisms like storage and gas in place to be able to support that system. Maybe we need to keep coal open a bit longer. Now, of course, if you're really absolutely, as I am, and many people are concerned about climate, of course, extending the life of coal is not a good thing, but letting the lights go out would be even worse, right? So we've got to get the balance right.
Yeah, and we can't get rid of gas just yet either, by the way.
Yeah, well, gas is the tricky one because even though when it's used, it's the most expensive form of electricity we have today, when we have periods of low wind or solar, gas will be the thing that fills in. It's the only one really that we have which is really flexible and we can rely on that gas to be there. Now, other solutions may emerge. People may find technologies and batteries that can be justified to see you more than comfortably through not just a night, but these periods of time when you get low renewable output can go for as long as a couple of weeks. We don't really have any other alternative yet, but we're not talking about tomorrow or even in the next 5 to 10 years. We're talking about the next 10, 15, 20 years.
All right. Well, Tony, the government's goal is to reach 82% renewable in 4 years, which, of course, is pretty ambitious. But just tell me, how long would it take for power prices to go down and stay down?
Okay, so what's going to happen now is that I think we are seeing already some downward movement in prices because of the supply-demand situation, and it has real potential to continue for the next few years. Most likely, as we see the next closure of coal-fired power stations, Eraring in New South Wales, Yallourn in Victoria, we may see, we may not, but we may see some increase in prices back up again a bit as a result of that change. Not dramatically, but some. And of course, the real question is going to be, how do we find, as we add more and more renewables, the need to make sure the system remains reliable will bring some costs. So, I'm not one who thinks we're going to see permanent reductions in prices. I think we're more likely to see prices go down a bit for a while and then recalibrate to a level of pricing which is probably not that much different from where it is now.
Tony Wood is the Senior Fellow of the Energy and Climate Change Program at the Grattan Institute. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Sam Dunn. Audio production by Cinnamon Nippard. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.